Good morning, Watershed. My name is Sean, and I am on the teaching team here at Watershed. And it's amazing to be here with you this morning, and we're going to just start with a little activity. So there should be a color swatch maybe on the screen coming up. Yes? Okay. What color is that? I heard teal. Blue? Anybody? Okay, so blue. Did we mostly land on blue? A version of blue? All right, next slide, please. What color is that? Mint. Also a version of blue, but I heard mint. Some variation there, right? I hope that you can see the variations in those colors, but I think also most of us went to some version of blue. All right, and then finally, the next slide. I think that we tend to just settle on simple. So maybe most of us in our minds saw blue or just a slight variation of that and don't realize how varied those colors can be. In my former life, before becoming a high school teacher and then a college professor, I was the creative director for a branding firm. And I spent my days naming things. I named whitening products for Listerine. I named Bowflex machines. I named pharmaceutical drugs. The descriptions under Bush's beans. I presided over focus groups to see how women would describe the taste and what herbs they could pick out of these bean varieties. I kid you not. And a proprietary blend that became, wait for it, Taco Fiesta. And I won't go into what my brown body felt when they were like, it tastes like a fiesta. Okay. I love names. I love details. That is perhaps the creative writer in me, I suppose. To me, language is wide and vast and meaningful. And so, yes, there is a wide span of difference between the words upset and disappointed. Ask my partner. He will tell you, oh yeah, that's different. And there are differences in miffed or irate. And to my mind, between upset, disappointed, miffed, and irate, only one of those is a synonym for mad. Words matter. My mother is from Costa Rica. She immigrated to the United States as a young mother, not even 3 years into her marriage to an American man, my father. She knew English, but she spoke it with a heavy accent. As a young girl, I watched my mother struggle to find words to describe her experiences. In Costa Rica, my mother was a college-educated, smart primary school teacher. In the United States, she was defined by the words her mouth tangled. I even wrote a poem about it that got picked up by a literary magazine that I'd like to read to you. It's called Unspoken. I want to tell my mother that I know. She never wanted this life, this fumbling through words not her own. How their foreign sounds must feel like betrayal. She tries to make them hers. Yellow becomes yellow. Her jagged accent renounces words she cannot find a native counterpart for. She mangles words she hates, or just falls silent. This is the greatest sound between us, the soundlessness of our stifled dialogue, vocabularies I can't translate, and the things she will not say. The truth is an untold confession, a burning silence, flames that consume us. My mother was diagnosed with agoraphobia early on in my childhood, and I love my mother deeply, and I was loved deeply by her. And yet, despite that, our relationship was often marked by strain. It's only now, with a lens afforded to me by the maturity of aging and the odd, very odd gifts of grief, that I am able to see and understand things about my mother I didn't before when she was alive. My mother and I struggled to name things we felt and experienced. And as a result, I think I felt unseen, and I think she felt unheard, and many things went unsaid. I never asked her. I only made assumptions about what she was feeling based on what I saw or on diagnoses. I grew up not asking questions. My mother's displays of emotions became something I internalized. But I don't know that I always correctly interpreted the root of her emotions because I never asked. Brené Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, deals with this very thing, with our inability to name our emotions precisely. It's Brown's opinion that we hem ourselves in when we cannot name our emotions accurately, and I couldn't agree more. Brown is a research scientist. She's dedicated a decade and a half to researching courage, vulnerability, and shame. And in a 5-year study, Brown surveyed more than 7,000 participants, and that's a pretty massive sample size. That's kind of unheard of in most studies. The team asked folks to list all the emotions that they could recognize and name as they were experiencing those said emotions. The average number of emotions, 7,000 participants were able to name just 3. Happy, sad, angry. Just those 3. Not irritated, nor satisfied, not content or anxious, not enraged, not depressed, not nervous or giddy or restless, not confused, nor calm, nor grief, not tranquil, not guilty, shame or overwhelm, hope, just happy, sad, angry. But we know the arc of emotions felt is much more diverse than just happy, sad, and angry. I mean, that's what I was going for with the paint chip, and I don't think it came through. But, right, the arc is much bigger. The color swatch of emotions is much, much longer. And certainly all possible emotions don't root back to just those 3. It's not a lack of emotions that's the issue at heart here. It's a lack of vocabulary to describe with accuracy what we feel. Brown says that language is our portal to meaning-making, connection, healing, learning, and self-awareness. In my own English composition classes at the university, I hammer the importance of the specificity of language, concrete details, nuanced language, the very right word for the experience that you're trying to express. When our words are limited, we trap ourselves in really small boxes. When our words are limited, we hem our ability to connect with others, to name our needs precisely, to give depth and breadth to our experiences, and therefore to be seen more wholly. Holy, not halo holy. I remember the early days of motherhood, and anyone who's ever had to care for an infant is probably familiar with the frustration of interpreting a child or a baby's cries. I have twins, so just imagine that times 2. I read a book about trying to decode crying. I was losing my mind from the 7 to 9 hour. And the premise of the book is that an infant's cries are really distinct. And if you can figure out the very nuanced difference to the ear, you can respond to the child's needs faster, short-circuiting the whole stressful affair. What strikes me about this is that even there, universally, our first language is crying. It's the first attempt we have at communicating, and experts even see nuance in that. Thankfully, we outgrow that phase, but we still remain largely disconnected. And it's primarily due to our inability to name what we feel. It's also linked to our extreme avoidance of vulnerability. We're going to put a pin in that and come back to that. We lack connection with others, but also connection to our own selves. We take our traumas and pain and we bury them deep, become numb. We tend to not be very good at making safe boundaries and do anything to avoid pain and shame. Brown says we must reevaluate everything, especially how we choose loving ourselves over making other people uncomfortable, how to better love ourselves over making people feel comfortable. Lord, if that did not hit my Enneagram 2 right in the gut like a ton of bricks, because I always will try to make people feel comfortable at the expense of my own feelings. In order to avoid pain, we tend to do a few things. We tend to either go numb, run away, or inflict our hurt on others in an attempt to gain some control, right? So spoiler alert, none of these are healthy or productive ways of being. And all of them come back to haunt us in big, big ways. It takes hard work to sit with our feelings, to try to make sense of them. It takes hard work to understand our thoughts and analyze our behaviors. It's hard work, but it's good work. The better we become at this for ourselves, the better we become at showing up authentically for others. If we can understand our own emotional wayfinding, we can better understand what motivates the behaviors of our loved ones. Their behavior doesn't necessarily become easier to tolerate, perhaps, but it does give us better choices, Brown suggests. If we can accurately label how we feel and recognize the behavioral responses those feelings tend to solicit, we can regulate those emotions far better. And of course, that leads to better well-being. I shudder my feelings up. As a child, I hardly ever expressed my emotions publicly. And for context, what I mean by public is like the living room. The only private sphere I had was my bedroom, or maybe even my mind. Sometimes I was afraid to even say it. I had a picture of the Virgin Mary above my bed, and so I was like, I can't say it out loud. So a lot of times when I mean private, I mean like just up here. Right? I falsely believed that there were no room for my emotions at the dinner table or the living room. That myth, for me, was triggered by an agoraphobic mother who was clinically depressed. And none of that is her fault. But somehow, I internalized the idea that I had to be good, and that part of being good was to not have or exhibit emotional needs. There wasn't space for that. Again, a false belief, a lot of mythology there. So I made myself small in order to not cause ripples in the water. I didn't show any curiosity about her experience, about the events that led her to feel isolated in a country so different from her own. And I wonder now, what might have happened if I had just asked her? What might have happened if I allowed my own emotions to show? Might she see herself reflected in me? Might she feel a little less alone then? Brown says that human emotions and experiences are layers of biology, biography, behavior, and backstory. And those are the critical concepts we need to understand in order to making meaningful connections both within ourselves and with others. So these 4 B's, biology, biography, behavior, and backstory, become the crux of understanding a myriad of emotions that are far more layered and complex than simply just happy, sad, angry. In fact, in Atlas of the Heart, Brown and her team unearthed 87 core emotions, which she then puts into context by saying these emotions are places we go to when, and then she kind of fills in the dots for you. When we are uncertain, when we compare, when things go awry, when things are not as they seem, when we are hurting, when we fall short of the mark, when we long for connection, when life is good, when our heart is open, when we feel wronged, when we self-reflect. In the coming weeks, my very, very talented colleagues are going to speak about this, the places we go to when. The map metaphor Brown lays out is useful in so many ways. Understanding where we go when certain emotions invade our space is helpful. I've long taught about the connection between place and identity and how the two are interwoven intricately. This makes sense to me as a bicultural, biracial, bilingual woman with dual citizenship. I am, in so many ways, the sum of the places I've experienced. Brown puts it this way: we are meaning makers, and a sense of place is central to meaning making. I have one foot planted in two metaphorical places. In my Latina identity, the Spanish word neplanta captures the sentiment perfectly. I am from in-between places. Black Americans have a similar concept, W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness. Our bodies are encoded with the soil of places we've never been to, but carry in our DNA. This is part of the biography of our identity, the places that form our emotions. I think biography is probably the easiest of the 4 B's to explore. It's informed by our family heritage, by the family rules, whether they're hidden or not, that govern our behavior and beliefs, the community and spaces where we belong. Bless you. When we become curious about the ways in which our families, cultures, and communities inform our beliefs, we become better stewards of our stories. I think the behaviors we exhibit when we struggle to name our emotions are also closely linked to biography. In many ways, our behaviors are learned. When my mother experienced panic attacks, she would dry heave. I witnessed it so many times it stopped being unusual or alarming. Instead, her visceral reaction to a stressor triggered a calm response from us. So we kids, my dad, we knew to look for the hard candy in her purse and locate the nearest bathroom or exit. And we did this wordlessly. It just became a routine that we internalized. We had no language. It's no surprise to me then that when I started to experience depression and uncovered hidden traumas in my own life, I started to dry heave too. This was a learned behavior for me. My body had coded dry heaving as a response to extreme stress, after watching the playbook so many times with my mother's own panic attacks. For both of us, our emotions were felt deep in our bodies. I think it's an ironic metaphor, really, because we didn't have the language to properly name what we felt. Our bodies responded in violent but nonverbal ways through our own throats. We vomited on the words we could not speak. We carry our traumas in our bodies. We feel our emotions in our bodies if we do not release them into the open with our words. Understanding how and why they show up is only part of the equation. We also must become aware of where they show up. That understanding of the why and the where and the how helps us unlock the backstory. If we are to become the tellers of our own stories, the stewards of our own emotions, we have to understand the context of our emotions. We have to unearth the trigger point, the starting place, our ground zero. Why did I lash out just now? Why do I feel so weary and exhausted? Why am I so enraged? What brought on this bout of uncontrollable weeping? If we are to own our own stories, and I want to be clear, I don't mean owning the things that happened to us, but the ways that we overcame those awful parts. If we're to own our stories, we must learn how to read the maps of emotions before we can ever hope to navigate them. And in order to do this, we have to be willing to feel some hard things, which brings me back to that avoidance of vulnerability. There are sharp edges that wound us when we open ourselves up to authentic emotions. The alternative is to go numb, sometimes with the help of harmful substances or addictive behaviors. Sometimes we engage in destructive patterns or abuse our privilege and power to feel some measure of control. We don't want to feel accountable for our missteps or the ways in which we've hurt others. We fear feeling shame. We fear feeling unwanted, and we fear feeling unloved. And we don't hold others accountable either. So a lot of times we let them steamroll past our boundaries. Or we build walls and let no one in. We don't talk about shame. But shame is anchored in the same ground as love is, and both require tenderness and vulnerability, to paraphrase Brown. Shame feeds on silence. And if we talk about it, if we name the things that happened and how it made it feel, if we name our emotions and connect the dots to our behaviors, shame has nowhere to grow. I've been preaching from the Bible of Brene all morning, and I've actually yet to talk about the real Bible, and I realize it's a little odd for a Sunday morning church experience. So let me just really quick credential this whole thing with a sermon bit. I'm kidding. I'm joking. But we don't have very far to go to crack our Bibles open before we talk about shame, right? It's part of our origin story as humanity. Eve bites from that damned apple, and we immediately know shame. It's literally one of the first things humanity feels. That feels really symbolic to me. That shame is what causes us to retreat into the wilderness. That shame is what severs our relationship with God. It's shame that puts a wedge between Adam and her partner. It's shame that starts to deconstruct the whole beautiful thing. But Jesus offers resurrection life, life without shame. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, we read, "Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God." We don't distort the word of God. We tell the truth and we tell it plain. These things require honest naming. Shame cannot exist in this type of light. So we tell our stories. We name our feelings. We move into brave space, knowing we are seen and loved by God. I invite you into this series. Get the book from the library or watch the HBO series if you have access, or just Google and watch some of our interviews. There's a ton of them now. And join us this next month as we explore the uncharted places we go when we open ourselves up to true emotions. Thank you.